appropriated in the third phase of coronavirus relief. The Trump administration will distribute a total of $12 billion in provider relief fund payments to 395 hospitals across the country that have been hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. These hospitals have collectively cared for over 70% of the 184,000 Americans that required hospital inpatient care. $10 billion of the $12 billion will go towards hospitals treating 100 or more COVID-19 admissions. HHS is distributing an additional $2 billion to these 395 hospitals in proportion to the amount of care they provide to low-income and uninsured patients. This is consistent with our effort to ensure that Americans who need federal government assistance the most receive it. We'll be releasing a breakdown of the states receiving this funding and the counties receiving this funding, but for your awareness, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois receive the most funding by state, while New York, Bronx, New York, and Cook, Illinois receive the most funding by county as determined by our metrics. Our healthcare providers, as President Trump has repeatedly acknowledged, are our heroes as we work to defeat the invisible enemy. This relief funding will help these heroes defeat this virus. In reacting to CARES relief, I love what this one provider said. He said, thank you and God for this relief. I have tears in my eyes out of gratitude for these funds. Thank you so, so, so much. Additionally, 100 flights as part of Project Airbridge have been completed to date. These flights have expedited nearly 1 billion pieces of PPE for our healthcare heroes. The third phase of coronavirus relief also included $320 billion in additional funding for the Paycheck Protection Program, which, as you all know, provides forgivable loans to small businesses in order to keep their employees on payroll. This program has been extraordinarily successful. During the first round of PPP loans, 1.6 million loans were issued to small businesses. Of those 1.6 million loans, 1 million of them were given to companies with 10 or fewer employees. So it has gone to small businesses and businesses that need it most. But the PPP, look, it's not just another government program. This is supporting everyday Americans who, through no fault of their own, have found themselves in this predicament.
The markets are down substantially today after the president yesterday suggested in the East Rim that he might use tariffs to punish China over the coronavirus. Is there any serious consideration being given to putting new tariffs on China, or was the president just spitballing yesterday?
Look, I won't get ahead of any announcements from the president, but I will echo the president's displeasure with China. It's no secret that China mishandled this situation. Just a few examples for you. They did not share the genetic sequence until a professor in Shanghai did so on his own the very next day. China shut down his lab for, quote, rectification. They slow-walked information on human-to-human transmission alongside the World Health Organization and didn't let U.S. investigators in at a very important time. So we take displeasure with China's actions, but I certainly won't get ahead of the president with those announcements.
Is the president seriously considering forcing China to pay some sort of compensation, reparations, whatever word you want to put on it?
Again, when it comes to retaliatory measures, I will not get ahead of the president.
The president said yesterday that he has a high degree of confidence that the coronavirus originated in a lab in Wuhan, China, and yet his own intelligence agencies say they're still investigating. So does the president have information, and has he drawn a conclusion that the intelligence community has not yet?
Look, the president's statement is consistent with the other intelligence assessments. While we continue to have very limited and dubious data from China, current assessments indicated that President Trump's statement is consistent with what some analysts believe is the epicenter of where the virus began. And I would note that intelligence statement you're referring to really made 2 points. One, that this virus originated in China. Two, that it began through contact with infected animals or was the result of an accident at a laboratory in Wuhan. So I consider that consistent with what the president said, that he's seen intelligence suggesting it could be in the Wuhan laboratory.
It seemed to lean into the idea that this started in a laboratory, whereas the statement that we saw from the DNI said, we're still investigating those two options that you just laid out. Is the president in any way creating mixed messaging by not saying, we're still investigating?
No, let me remind everyone, intelligence is just an estimate, essentially, and it's up to policymakers to decide what to do with that intelligence. In this case, the policymaker is the President of the United States, and he'll make that decision at the right time. And with regard to vaccines, I would note the words of Dr. Fauci, which are these: going into a phase 1 trial within 3 months of getting the sequence is unquestionable, the world indoor record. Nothing has ever gone this fast. So what the president is doing, and under the president's leadership, we're in phase 1 faster than ever before, according to Dr. Fauci, and that should encourage the American people.
Kayleigh, this time last week, the president was saying that he was not happy with Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp for beginning the reopening process in the way that he was at the time that he was. A week later, there have been some peaks and valleys in new cases in Georgia, but overall the trend line is down. Do you know what the president's thinking about the Georgia reopening is as of today?
Look, the president is resolute in saying that the states take the lead here. It's the decision of governors to decide what is best for their state. That being said, I talked to the experts, I talked to Dr. Birx, I talked to Dr. Fauci, and they say, rightfully so, this president has always sided on the side of data, which is why he encourages all states to follow the data-driven guidelines to reopening. All states from Georgia on down the line should follow those guidelines, but ultimately it is the decision of the states. And one note I would make about the president, in times of national emergency, we seem to have had a trend in this country where presidents aggregate power at the federal level, but this president has devolved power. He's invested in a principle that I cherish, and I know many others do, which is federalism, and I think that was the right.
You mentioned Dr. Fauci a minute ago. Are we going to have any more press briefings with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and the health experts, or is the White House kind of shifting the message to, focus more on the economy and less on the public health aspect?
Well, let me back up and talk to you a little bit about how we approach disseminating information. When I talk with my colleague Alyssa and we plan out the communication strategy for this White House along with the president and Ben as well, what we do is we say, what is the best mode for the public to receive this information at this time? And we allow the news cycle and the needs of the American people to guide us. And, at the moment, what we see happening, and I hinted at this in my gaggle last week, is you have 35 states, and probably more at this point, with plans to reopen the country. Americans are looking to reopening the country. We've had Dr. Birx in several events this week. They've been Dr. Birx and Fauci out on the airwaves. They're really incredible people and have done a great service for this country, but we allow the news of the day to guide us, what the American people need to hear. And right now we're in a reopening phase, which is why you've seen the president this week with CEOs, you've seen him with small business owners, with small business employees, today with some great heroes that have emerged from this pandemic and have done a lot of the hard work. So every day we approach this as, how can we disseminate this information? There's a need for information, which is why I'm here, supplementing the efforts of this president.
So there was a piece in the New York Times that said senior Trump administration officials have pushed intelligence agencies to hunt for evidence to support the theory that COVID-19 was made in a Wuhan laboratory.
I can assure you that no one is pressing the intelligence community to come to a determination. The intelligence community statement stands. It's in perfect concert with what the president said. So, I encourage the media to convey the facts to the American people, which is that we're in line as an administration and we stand by the intelligence community, and that is in complete concert with what the president said yesterday.
The president said that Democrats would, quote, have to give us a lot for aid to states. I'm wondering if you have any idea of what specifically the White House or the president is asking for, and secondly, what you'd say to somebody like Governor Cuomo, who says, the president's already told me, a few weeks ago that he would support this type of assistance, and why are we bailing out, airlines or defense contractors, but not the states that pay teachers or first responders?
Well, as said, look, I will certainly look to consider helping states who have coronavirus reasons for the financial situation they find themselves in, but he doesn't want this to be an excuse for decades and decades of bad Democrat governance that have run some of these states into a financial predicament. So he is.
Yes, Hillbilly EDU here. One last question. Since any Google search will reveal that the relation is pretty much unequivocal, that the states and cities with the highest death rate or hotspots of the pandemic seem to be the very same ones that need to file for bankruptcy and are fortunate enough to receive these bailouts, like Detroit and different areas, Illinois and New York.
Will you pledge never to lie to us from that podium?
I will never lie to you. You have my word on that.
It's no worse than the flu season. If you don't think that rights are being taken away where you are not permitted to breathe fresh oxygen because you are not allowed to go in stores or in some places be out in public without wearing a mask covering your face. In what mentality, critical thinking, logical thinking skills does that make any sense to anyone that you have a mask strapped across your face, walking outside in the fresh air? So now you are breathing in your own carbon dioxide daily. And if you happen to be sick, you are constantly just reinfecting yourself by breathing your own shit in all day long. Your body is now becoming stressed because you're not getting the proper oxygen that the body needs to perform optimally. This is scientific. This isn't my opinion. This is scientific. And the fact that people look at you like you are an alien if you don't have a mask on is preposterous. It is insane. It is illogical. It is uneducated. And it is quite frankly disgusting that now you are frowned upon. How dare you go outside and get fresh oxygen for yourself? You reckless fool. How dare you? When are people going to wake the fuck up? Because this has gone far enough. If people didn't think that their rights were being taken away, because people are still commenting, asking, what rights have been taken away? They would not be protesting. They would not be protesting to get back their freedoms and their rights to open their businesses, to travel freely, to go to parks, to go to beaches. And you think, but I do know that I love sharing information with people that have way more knowledge than I do because they are actual doctors. They're in science, they're in toxicology, they're on the front lines. That I can share this information so that it's not some girl in her yoga outfit telling you shit that you don't want to hear. Because I could do this all day. And I have no intention of slowing down. So, if you want to continue on this path, to continue to tell people that they are wrong for wanting all of their freedoms back, so that we're not sitting there waiting in line at a grocery store to get in. And you can't get in unless you wear a mask. See, the thing with the masks is now all of a sudden, how long, what are we, 7 or 8 weeks into this? Now they want to mandate wearing masks. I think you guys are a little late by about 3 months. Because now when it's on the decline and people are not afraid anymore, that is a symbolism of fear. That is a symbolism and reminder of that boogeyman that's out there that's going to get you. You wear a mask and people know, okay, we're all in this together. Like, this is what we have to do for the good of humanity, as bullshit as it is, because there's no science backed by people that are healthy wearing masks and not giving themselves proper oxygen to their bodies. Once you remove that and you take away that mask, people are going to forget about this. And that is the last thing they want, because that is not part of the agenda. They want to inject you with their chemical bullshit because that is the agenda. So once you don't have to wear those masks anymore, the reminder is gone and it will fade into the distance. So I'm going to play a few clips from people that I respect highly, from people that are actually out there on the front lines and seeing what's going on.
Misinformation to the highest order, and the reason for this misinformation is what's coming down. Stanford came out with a study a couple days ago. The Stanford study said this shows that the rate of death from COVID-19 is no different from influenza. That's killed you. You have a heart attack, COVID-19. They're putting the cause of death as COVID-19 for almost everything right now. Now, you would have to be blind and deaf to not recognize that what is happening is not normal and is not justified. And because they can't justify the numbers, they're now manipulating the numbers. They're now adding numbers to it. When a surgeon wears a mask, and when a nurse wears a mask with a critical patient, we're not wearing that mask to protect ourselves. When you're doing open heart surgery, you're replacing a knee, or you're doing some kind of hernia repair, you're wearing the mask so you don't drool, you don't spit, you don't cough, you don't sneeze into that open surgical field. It's because you're keeping it sterile. All right? Now we come to the United States and we come to the current issue. Everything is misinformation. all right? We know that stress increases the cortisol, which is the stress hormone, which decreases the immune system. So when you scare people, tell them to stay home, you suppress their immune system because you're scaring them, you further suppress them because economic issues, there's stress. A face mask reduces the amount of oxygen coming in. So now your body's in a chronic state of stress. And that face mask is obstructing airway. They're pushing this agenda, and it's an agenda to make people weaker, to make them more susceptible. The face mask then also prevents when your body's being stressed out and you're not getting enough oxygen, it then creates other issues. Remember they said don't touch your face and don't okay, well, if you're sweating and you've got face masks, don't you think people are going to be pushing it around? On top of that, when you have this release of viruses, because viruses live inside our cells, when I say live, they're not living, but when they're released and you're wearing a face mask, you're preventing the ability you're actually stressing the body out and increasing the viral activation.
More states are letting businesses reopen despite the risks, while others are taking a more cautious approach, sparking new protests. We get all the latest from NBC's Miguel Almaguer.
Tonight in California, where stay-at-home orders remain in effect, business as usual has never looked so shocking. From restaurants near Los Angeles to cities outside Sacramento, open defiance from local leaders and businesses flouting mandates now 7 weeks old.
We can't stop working. We can't stop living.
With a chorus of protests growing louder across the country, tempers are flaring at capitals.
Let us go back to work.
City centers and on street corners. In New York, a police officer punched a bystander after attempting to enforce social distancing orders. In Michigan, 3 people now charged with killing a security guard who was shot after a dispute with a customer over a face mask. Police are also looking for this man who wiped his nose on a clerk's shirt when asked why he wasn't wearing a face covering. USA! In Arizona, where emergency orders were extended, at least 2 county sheriffs say they won't enforce the measures.
We don't want to create criminals out of innocent people.
But in Chicago, a different message from the mayor after several parties over the weekend.
Don't make us treat you like a criminal. But if you act like a criminal and you violate the law and you refuse to do what is necessary to save lives in the city in the middle of a pandemic, we will take you to jail. Period.
Amid warmer weather and growing angst about staying home, today 6 more states partially reopened. In Florida, some shops and restaurants can open with reduced capacity. While Miami remains shut down, beaches in Clearwater are open with people spread out.
In states where the lockdown lingers, it could take months to reopen some businesses, and that is driving the protests and defiance we're seeing across the nation.
I'm Blaine Alexander. As states and now stores start to reopen, things are looking very different. At malls, masks, blocked off areas, and arrows taped to the ground are now the norm, trying to strike that balance between the safety of Americans and the health of the economy. And for some, lining up to get inside, it's working.
We're probably going to get viewed as not doing what we should by getting out, but we're going to do it anyway.
But open malls do not mean open stores. At these 2 shopping centers near Atlanta, only a handful of stores were open.
Made us realize that things still not normal.
Many of the big chains still shuttered, but Macy's, America's largest department store chain, opened 68 locations today. Most fitting rooms will be closed. Any clothing that is tried on or returned will be held for 24 hours before going back on the shelf. No more services that require close contact, like makeup trials, fittings, and alterations. There will be increased ventilation in all stores and plexiglass barriers at checkout counters. Best Buy will also reopen more than 200 stores this month, but shopping will be by appointment only. Costco is resuming normal hours and requiring that all shoppers cover their faces. Whole Foods will be requesting the same and handing out disposable masks. And more Starbucks locations are brewing again, but for now, it's drive-through and takeout only. Experts say some of the smaller stores may feel pressure to reopen faster because they don't have the online presence or financial cushion of bigger chains. But for all stores, bills are due.
And tonight, J.Crew is the first big-name brand to declare bankruptcy. The clothing chain could lose up to $900 million this year. Lester?
All right, Blaine Alexander tonight, thank you. And with the virus forcing some big meat processing plants to shut down, the ripple effect is growing, with major grocery chains now limiting how much meat shoppers can buy. We get more on that story now from Gabe Gutierrez.
With more and more empty shelves, Kroger now says it will limit ground beef and poultry purchases in some of its stores, and Costco is restricting fresh beef, pork, and poultry items to 3 per customer.
I was able to score on one and can't wait to get it on the barbecue.
The CDC says about 5,000 meat and poultry plant workers have contracted coronavirus in 115 plants across 19 states. Social distancing and other measures are now slowing down plants nationwide.
What you see with this is less supplies and higher prices. And whether we're talking beef, pork, chicken, lamb, whatever your favorite is, really, we are already seeing really skyrocketing prices.
After being closed for 2 weeks, this meat processing plant in South Dakota, where hundreds of workers got sick, partially reopened today. It's installed new physical barriers on the production floor and is taking the temperatures of its workers. A closed Tyson plant in Indiana is also set to restart production this week. But a federal strike force is now in Amarillo, Texas, after a surge in COVID-19 cases at local plants there.
They will bring resources, and most importantly, they will bring strategies that they've been using in other beef packing plants.
President Trump has invoked the Defense Production Act to order meat plants to stay open, deeming them essential.
You know, you have plants with no problem at all. Then you have some where it was a hot spot. Those people are tending to get better very quickly.
But some workers say they're scared to go back to work.
It's kind of hard to have social distance and you work side by side. I don't know what they could do to really ease the tension.
Experts say there is no mass food shortage here in the U.S., but they warn panic buying could lead to spot shortages across the country. Lester?
All right, Gabe Gutierrez, thanks. Now to the big changes coming to travel. Airlines now requiring passengers to wear face masks during their entire flight, and a major cruise company already talking about launching new voyages. Here's Tom Costello.
With the nation's airlines fighting for their survival, new rules to keep both crew members and passengers safe. As of today, passengers on JetBlue, Delta, and United must join crew members in wearing masks from the moment they check in. By next Monday, Frontier, American, Alaska, and Southwest will also require masks. Some airlines will provide them to those who don't have them. If passengers refuse, they could be denied boarding. Faith Leonard, newly married on Zoom, was today flying from New York to Georgia.
Some have people around, some are just two, some of them are completely empty, and most people wearing masks.
Every airline now deep cleaning their planes, enforcing social distancing, and limiting the number of passengers, leaving middle seats open. Southwest CEO Gary Kelly.
We're doing everything we can to make it as safe as humanly possible.
Today, airline stocks slid further after billionaire investor Warren Buffett said he's now sold his airline holdings.
The future is much less clear to me about how the business will turn out.
At Tampa International Airport, passenger volume down a staggering 97%. The airport now encouraging face masks, more cleaning, more hand sanitizer, plastic shields at ticket counters, and floor markings to keep everyone separate.
I would say somewhere between 2 to 4 years before we get back to pre-COVID levels. That's what our forecasters are telling us, and that's what we're planning on.
Meanwhile, Carnival Cruise Line, also in dire straits, now says it hopes to sail on August 1st, despite CDC concerns that cruise ships exacerbate the virus's spread. And Uber asking drivers and passengers to wear masks. Back here at the nation's deserted airports, the numbers are alarming. On Sunday, just 170,000 people flew nationwide. A year ago on the same day, 2.5 million people.
Never before have the stakes been higher. Never before has the fear been more ramped up. And never before has the surplus of information been more difficult to prioritize. For those of you who've been paying attention for a while, you probably had an idea where all of this was going. But I don't think any of us could have anticipated our current trajectory. A world where Big Brother seeks to have the only and final say over the health and well-being of ourselves and our families. In this video, I've put together a collection of key news stories that got absolutely buried in the 24-hour news cycle. And I've arranged them on a timeline with the proper context so that we can better interpret the events taking place all around us. Before we begin, unless otherwise stated, none of what I'm about to say is conjecture. None of it is my opinion. Simply a menagerie of facts, reports, and documentation. Not sensationalism, feelings, or fear. All of my sources are pinned as the top comment underneath this video. So, let's begin, shall we? Let's travel back to the 2002 SARS outbreak. If you didn't know already, SARS is a viral respiratory illness in the corona family and presents as an atypical pneumonia but doesn't respond to standard treatments. Between 2002 and 2003, SARS spread to 24 countries. 8,000 people worldwide were said to have contracted the virus, and of those 8,800 died. The United States government responded by funding a collaboration between Chinese scientists and the U.S. military from the bioweapons lab at Fort Detrick in Maryland, an institution which was the center of the biological weapons program and was established during the Second World War. Fort Detrick served as home to some of the government's darkest experiments on unwitting American citizens and prisoners. The biological weapons program, in conjunction with the military and the CIA, gave us some of our most well-documented greatest hits, like the CIA's MK-Ultra mind control program, which used chemical substances and brainwashing techniques to completely control a subject. Or like I've talked about in previous videos, Operation Sea Spray, which took place in 1950 with the US Navy spraying harmful bacteria into the air about 2 miles off the California coast, in order to determine the susceptibility of a large city like San Francisco to a bioweapon attack. Of course, these are just 2 examples, but there are many more. I'm using these examples to illustrate that there is an established history of the United States government unleashing bioweapons on ordinary citizens, doing objectively awful human experimentation and attempting to justify it under the guise of national security. These institutions, these programs, and these alphabet agencies operate the way they do because they know they have almost total immunity. Not a critique, just an assessment of history and of reality. So back to 2002. Chinese scientists and a team led by a guy we know pretty well by now, Dr. Anthony Fauci, partnered up to prevent future SARS outbreaks by studying the virus strains from bats and human tissues. In this whole process, they created in a lab, produced what they called pandemic superbugs that were more lethal than the strains of the virus found in nature. This alarmed researchers who were following these studies because, hey, what happens when the superbug escapes the lab? What then? At least that was the concern echoed in a New York Times article about Dr. Fauci's research. And Fauci was the target of quite a bit of criticism, with one Harvard doctor telling Times Magazine that Fauci's experiments basically weaponized the virus instead of preventing a future pandemic, which preventing a future pandemic was the stated objective. You know, keep people safe instead of putting them in harm's way. That's why his team got all those taxpayer dollars. Over the years, there were various incidents with reported mishaps that almost released this deadly superbug. And in 2014, President Obama stopped Fauci's federal funding, in the United States, that is. But those federal restrictions were dodged in one clever maneuver, by shifting all of the research to a military lab in another country, the military lab in Wuhan, China. Back in 2008, the United States Embassy was established in Wuhan. In 2014, the same year that Obama stopped Fauci's federal funding in the United States, the funding of the same research shifted to a laboratory in Wuhan, where the money rolled in the form of grants. Some numbers have been tossed around in the media and at White House briefings. $3.7 million over the span of several years, all the way up to $7.4 million. The reality is, that's the money we know about, but there is a high likelihood it is much, much more. Perhaps the more important question is, why does the United States have an embassy right in the heart of Wuhan? And why is the United States funding bat rectal swab research in another country? Delivered just days before Trump was inaugurated in January of 2017, Dr. Fauci warned of a surprise outbreak. He said, "There is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases. The culmination of all of the aforementioned material rests in the shackled hands of Dr. Charles Lieber." Court documents released by the United States Justice Department have revealed that Dr. Lieber, the chair of the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology at Harvard University, has received more than $15 million in grant funding from the National Institutes of Health and the Department of Defense. These grants require the disclosure of significant foreign financial conflicts of interest, including financial support from foreign governments or foreign entities. Well, Lieber didn't actually disclose all of his relationships because, unbeknownst to Harvard University beginning in 2011, Lieber became a strategic scientist at Wuhan University of Technology in China. A classic case of double-dipping and treasonous behavior. But wait, there's more. The Wuhan University of Technology paid Lieber $50,000 per month with living expenses, and he was awarded $1.5 million to establish a research lab at the university. But old Lieber never disclosed this relationship to his American colleagues. Also arrested alongside Lieber was a lieutenant of the People's Liberation Army and member of the Chinese Communist Party, who was posing as a student at Boston University. Somehow, she had accessed U.S. military websites, researched U.S. military projects, and compiled information while in the United States and sent it right along to the People's Liberation Army. So the Harvard professor was a double agent, the Boston student was a Chinese spy. Since the start of these events we've seen play out in 2020, Bill Gates, despite not being an elected official, holding a medical degree, or even graduating from college, has been the go-to authority on all pandemic-related discussion in the media. But never mentioned is how invested Bill Gates is in the cure, as he's currently building 7 factories for all the vaccines in production. So yes, during the second half of 2019, all of these events happened within just months of each other. Fort Detrick was shut down in August because of problems with the disposal of dangerous materials. In October, Event 201 was held and the World Military Games were hosted in China. Then, a few weeks later, 2 Chinese nationals were arrested. One of them caught smuggling biological materials to China. And Dr. Lieber was arrested in tandem with his ties to China. Around the same time, the first case of corona was documented in Wuhan, with the official story being that it originated at a wet market just miles away from the Wuhan military laboratory, that the U.S. has been pumping grants into for the last decade and is in close proximity to the U.S. consulate. And even though the term wet market has the same CIA Mockingbird media aura as grassy knoll or ground zero, we are absolutely not allowed to question the official narrative on the internet because Susan over here on YouTube is banning anyone who goes against the WHO talking points, even though the WHO is clearly aligned with China. Twitter will ban your account if you suggest going outside and having fun, and Facebook fact-checkers and Snopes writers are working around the clock to debunk any claims that question the official wet market narrative. Again, none of what I just said is how I feel or my bias. These are substantiated claims and an untainted reflection of the reality in which we live. These major tech companies are the new ministry of truth, and as logical, reasonable people who have a platform to ask questions and present facts, our days are numbered on these platforms. You know, there is plenty of evidence that a virus didn't just organically originate in some wet market. That evidence is absolutely worthy of investigation and discussion because the ramifications and consequences of this virus have been historic. Never before has society all over the world been shut down on a micro and macro level. And there is evidence that something is happening under the cover of this pandemic. What we have witnessed is the pretext for a general reset, and we aren't even free to talk about it from the confines of our homes, where we have been instructed to self-quarantine since March. Why? No, really, why? There are plenty of authoritative voices who have attempted to question the narrative, and those voices have been censored into oblivion. They are the new lepers of our society, paraded across Mockingbird media headlines as dangerous individuals. We have a Nobel Prize-winning scientist who has been saying that corona was artificially created in a lab by scientists working on an AIDS vaccine, as he found out that the virus's sequence showed elements of HIV. He's not the only person saying the virus was created in a lab. In fact, on April 30th, President Donald Trump went against the information from the U.S. intelligence community by claiming that he has seen evidence that gives him a high degree of confidence the virus originated in a laboratory. So what are the implications of the timeline I've just laid out for you? From where I'm sitting, the facts demonstrate that big governments all over the world, including the United States government, historically have conducted biowarfare and psychological warfare experiments on citizens at home and abroad. And in doing so, they operate with near immunity. After patient zero was reported, media outlets everywhere were screaming about bats and wet markets, mind control terms like grassy knoll and ground zero, while big stories like Harvard's Charles Lieber were buried. As we dig into the moments leading up to patient zero and the fallout, we are greeted by a familiar cast of characters that I think we should refer to as the medical mafia henceforth, as they are people invested in the cause and the cure. And they are above questioning, as anyone who openly engages in the questioning of the WHO's allegiance or Bill Gates' billionaire depopulation efforts gets silenced. And any idea that conflicts with the mainstream media is labeled conspiracy theory, a CIA term from start to finish. The only implication I'm going to voice in this video is that the whole thing stinks, like an overcrowded wet market in August.